There are a lot of persona traits to choose from, and today we'll be ranking them from best to worst in a tier list. So you know which ones to bring and which ones to avoid. And just remember, none of this is fact. This is merely just my opinion. What you may think may differ, so just keep that in mind. Just, don't take it as fact or anything. But without further ado, let's begin. At the bottom of F tier is Exhibitionist. The extra recovery speed is only really useful when swinging through pallets and missing, helping you catch up to the survivor quicker and can sometimes, very rarely, get you a hit. But the gain is too minimal to make a difference 99% of the time. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the first part of the effect doesn't seem to really work when there's no one else nearby, which is odd. But even if it did, it'd still be really mid. The 10% recovery speed on missed swings doesn't really change much. And even when there's a harasser, unless 2 or more survivors are harassing, it's pretty much useless. And even if you get the full effect, it's still really useless because a quicker recovery from missed swings, unless it's like double the recovery speed, is not good at all. Not to mention, most survivors kite via constant transitioning nowadays, and hardly tight kite, so you'll get very few chances to make use of it. And the one scenario I speak of where it would be useful is when you swing through a pallet and miss, and need to catch up, which happens quite a bit while someone is tight kiting. But again, the recovery speed bonus is hardly enough to make a difference in normal chases, and even at max stacks, it's not good either, with still minimal impact. It's just F tier, I don't know what to say. Alright, next in F tier we got No Survivors. If this was a Duo Hunters tier list, this would be S tier. But since this is normal matches, yeah, it's kinda garbage. The extra attack recovery speed at most would be useful for the first hit on a harasser, and that's only if you're planning to pursue them. If not, it's kinda useless. It saves a bit of time, I guess, but it's just not that great. Sure, it can be amazing for situations with 2 or 3 survivors harassing, but that's literally never gonna happen. The only situation I can think of where it's useful is when like 2 guys are trying to heal someone on floor, for the last cipher to get primed, but that's so niche and situational, and most times it won't even make a difference anyway. So yeah, F tier. Another perk we have in F tier is Nostalgic. This perk is honestly pretty much useless. Most times you're right next to chair or within 12 meters, so the movement speed buff won't really take effect, and the aura reading ability is basically useless, because unless you're extraordinarily blind and oblivious like me, it should be obvious where the survivor is heading. The only use this would have is if like a cord shoots you and rescues, and then the movement speed bonus you can use to catch up, which is okay. I mean, it's nothing great, but it's decent, I guess. But that almost never happens because barely anyone plays cord. So most of the time, this perk will just be fucking useless. F tier. Alright, at the bottom of D tier, we have Giant Claw, which is literally a useless perk outside of those few clutch moments where it can get you basement, which can be game changing. But besides that, it's essentially useless. I mean, it kind of helps against harassers a little, but not much. It's very minimal effect. Doesn't really make much of difference. D tier. Next we got Street Sweeper. A decent perk for finding survivors hiding and trying to heal. While not the most impactful, because a lot of times survivors will heal far away from you, and when it does work, and you find survivors healing and, you know, stop them, it can be good, but most of the time they'll probably just finish healing before you can even reach them. Because again, they won't be starting the heal in your terror radius, they'll be outside of it, so they'll be a good fair distance away. And on top of that, you're wasting 3 persona points for a very situational perk that doesn't really help all that much, when those could be spent elsewhere on more useful perks. In D tier. Next in D tier we have Hunter's Instinct. With the new area select mode, you know, where you can choose your spawns, this perk has become kinda useless. Seeing where survivors spawn makes it really easy to just go straight to who you want to chase. And while this perk helps slightly with reaching them, it's not really that great. You no longer have to risk rotating the rescuers anymore, really, and, you know, deal with a lot of rotating and have to rotate a lot yourself. So this perk isn't that useful anymore. But it's still okay, I guess. D tier. And the last one in D tier might be a bit controversial, but I'm not sure how good it is in like tournaments. But it is Quenching Effect. And while before I used to think this perk was really good, after the addition of area select mode, you know, choosing spawn, it seems to have become basically useless. What the appeal back then was that after 50 seconds, you'd see the aura of the survivor you'd prefer to chase and TP to them. But with the ability to choose spawns and see where survivors spawn, that niche has become kinda useless. The only use this perk has now is locating survivors like Mechanic or Mind's Eye while they're rotating, or to some extent still being used to locate the survivor you want if the servs rotate very well and you get very unlucky when choosing a spawn. But beyond that, it's basically useless. D tier. Alright, at the bottom of C tier we got Mock. An extra 5% movement speed is nice, but it's really not that impactful due to the condition required. You only really get this effect while someone is chaired, and usually you'd be camping when someone is chaired, so you can't really roam around to make good use of it. And it doesn't really help with camping all that much. You'll rarely be stopping rescues because of this perk, giving you that slight movement speed bonus. In endgame scenarios, it can be a bit more useful though, when traveling around with someone shared, and can make the difference between you stopping survivors from opening or reaching gate in time, but those situations are few and far between. So I'd say D tier. Nice to have, but not all that impactful. Next we got Hospitable. I mean, it's a pretty simple perk. It helps you reach chair faster, which is convenient and nice, but that's about it. It's just, you know, a nice perk to have. It's D tier. And then next in C tier is Hunt. This perk, after some testing, would be a lot better if chases didn't constantly abruptly end mid-chase. Like what counts as a chase to keep this perk's effect just ends, which is retarded where you're still chasing someone. Like, I don't know who designed this or optimized it, but it's actually kind of ass. And it's just honestly incredibly frustrating. What counts as a chase should really be adjusted, because this is really, it really feels bad to use. And even if it did work as intended, the amount of times you'll be pursuing someone for 8+ seconds without using a skill, as a good portion of hunters, is pretty minimal. But when it does work, it can be pretty decent. It'll net you a few hits you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Just the issues with what counts as a chase and the requirements to get the speed boost really kind of hold it back. Still, C tier. At the bottom of B tier, we have Deteriorate. It's just a nice passive perk to have. While it's not as impactful as Panic, it still provides some decent passive slowdown to buy yourself just a bit of time. Not really the most impactful, but it's nice to have. B tier. Panic. Basically a better version of Deteriorate. And together they do slow down the game quite a bit. At most you'll usually have 2 people injured, which slows down the decoding speed of all survivors by 6%. And if you get 3 or 4 people injured, it gets even better. But stacked with Deteriorate, the slowdown provided is nothing to scoff at, and is pretty significant. A solid B tier. And then we got Deer Hunt. A good perk to ensure you don't lose any slug survivors, and it's especially useful for people like me who are blind as fuck and lose survivors extremely easily. So just a solid B tier. Not too game changing, but very convenient and a good quality of life perk. Next we have Control Freak, the version that gives you a speed boost when you fall from above. This perk is good for helping chases in 2-story buildings, and can actually be quite decent at it. The only issue with it is it's really short duration, not allowing you to catch up too much, but even so, it's still really not that bad, and can come in handy with closing the gap decently well when survivors are looping places like Big Boat or a 2-story in Leo's or Hospital. Solid B tier. Next we have Control Freak. Making survivors die 9% faster on chair is pretty decent, though it is pretty useless if the survivor goes to rescue early, unless they're across the map. It's just a nice perk to have, but it's not the most impactful. I've seen people argue that can be an insane game changer, and I just don't see it. Sure, you might get a terror shock or 2 from it, but against any good players, it's very unlikely this perk will force them to make an after-half rescue if they play rescuer right and go early. It can be impactful towards the end game though. Having someone across the map on a huge map like Moonlit, shared on the other end of the map, and someone needing to rotate to make rescue. When the survivor is dying 9% faster, that can make things a bit more difficult. But generally speaking, it's not the most impactful, but it certainly has its moments. Though I will mention, it forcing survivors to rescue sooner rather than later does save you time. Quicker rescues, less time spent camping, less time with the survivor on chair. So, that does help with the overall match. Solid B tier. Next we have After Effects. While quite situational, the times where you can use it do help quite a bit. The extra time survivors have to spend healing a downed player is pretty significant, and can really change the outcome of a match, due to them not being able to get picked up in time in certain situations. Like if another player is trying to heal as the hunter approaches or something, trying to pick up a survivor off the floor. It's a pretty solid perk that can, at worst, still be a significant waste of time for the survivors, and at best, be pretty game-changing perk that can help quite a lot. But not really that game-changing most of the time due to how situational it is. But still, I'd say solid B tier. Next we have Tolerance. Pretty good against Batter and Little Girl, but beyond that, it's not all that impactful. There's only a handful of survivors that can push you and slow you down, and the slowness reduction isn't the greatest either, but it is pretty decent for what it's worth, and I've personally found this perk pretty useful from time to time. Solid B tier. Next we have Rage. An alright perk that helps with dealing with stunners. Even at its lowest investment, it's still good. It makes chasing stunners far more bearable. Though there's another perk I'll mention that's just this, but better, which I'll talk about later. But when stacked with Rage, with that perk stacked with Rage, you're basically unstoppable. But yeah, pretty okay perk. Nothing too extraordinary, just, convenient. And, makes chasing stunners a lot easier. Solid B tier. Addiction. Helps deal with harassment. It's pretty alright, but it's the second stun reduction perk I've talked about today. So, it's good for helping with harassment, more situational than rage, but honestly, if you're looking to deal with stunners and harassment, you're better off going for this and the perk before it, which addiction isn't as good as, but it's pretty good. B tier. Wither. The movement speed reduction is pretty significant and can help quite a lot of camping, especially as hunters like Feaster or Woo. Though it does lose value on hunters like Bonbon, but just a solid B tier perk. Impact. While a pretty annoying perk, it's not the most impactful perk. I mean, the slower healing does waste time for survivors, so it isn't bad by any means. But it isn't exactly all that impactful. But it can be a nice slowdown perk. B tier. Announcement. Can be a game changer, especially when paired with can be a game changer, especially when paired with other endgame perks. Seeing where everyone is extremely useful for playing out your strategy and acting accordingly towards the end of the match. Solid A tier. It can be really strong. Mischievous. This perk can be really good, especially with Woo, because you can stack it up with his TP interaction buff and pick up insanely fast. And for other hunters, it's also just really good because it can throw off harassers and make dealing with them far easier and save you a lot of time. It's a pretty effective perk from my experience and a solid A tier. Next in A tier, we have Carnival. This perk is pretty good and a necessity for chasing survivors once the gates are powered. Without the 5% speed bonus it provides, the survivors you're chasing will most certainly have the same speed bonus, and that 5% can make a pretty huge difference at the end of the match. So having this to equalize that helps a lot, and the extra 10% recovery speed is a nice quality of life added on as well, saving you precious time and potentially, making or breaking how the match plays out with, those few seconds do matter a lot. Or the extra second or two. Next we have Berserker. Even with just 1 point invested into this perk, it can be really good. The amount of times I was able to bell and down someone as Woo after hitting them just because of the bonus attack recovery is insane. It's just a really good perk that helps with camping a lot. Being able to recover significantly fast when hitting someone makes it far easier to stop rescuers. And even if you don't stop the rescue, you'll still be on the survivor significantly quicker with Berserker, which makes it, easier to double hit the rescuer or farm the rescued survivor. It's just a very solid perk. A tier. Impulsive. This perk is extremely useful for Wu Chang specifically, and can be really good for just about any hunter that relies heavily on M1. It's still somewhat decent on hunters who don't really M1 much. The speed boost can catch survivors off guard and net you quite a lot of hits you otherwise probably wouldn't have hit without it. I've gotten a few terror shocks simply because of some survivors just didn't expect me to land such a hit, given the distance between them and I. Granted, the terror shocks aren't really a selling point because most good survivors won't let that happen, but the ability to get hits you otherwise wouldn't have with the speed boost is really good. And that alone just makes this perk really worth investing into if you're playing an M1 reliant killer. Or an M1 reliant hunter. Solid A tier. Insolence. Now this is a difficult one to rank. For most hunters, this perk is basically useless. But for some hunters like Woo, it's instrumental to their success. So it's either S tier for some hunters or just garbage for others. There's no real in between. So for that fact, I'll just put it in A tier. Inertia. This perk gives you a 10% faster recovery speed, and literally every build uses it. And for good reason. That 10% extra attack recovery speed is really good for ensuring the least distance lost when chasing. And it helps a lot with camping as well. Though you never notice this because you're basically always using it, and never really get to experience how slow your recovery speed is without it. But yeah, a simple but effective perk that helps a lot. Solid A tier. Everyone should run this. I mean, everyone's probably already running it anyway. Claustrophobia. While a very niche perk, it is still insanely good. For the situations where you can make use out of it, it can be extremely game-changing. Making the gates take significantly longer to open gives you a huge window of opportunity to down a survivor you've been tunneling, share them, and then TP the gate. While you can't do this without this perk, your window of opportunity is usually not big at all, and in fact, you usually lose even if you down the survivor within like 5 seconds or so, because they just open the gates that fast. But with this perk, as long as you down the survivor relatively quick and share them fast, you have a good chance for a comeback that this perk allows you to have with the extra time it provides. Its conditions are what prevent it from being top tier though, because it just makes it, you know, a little too conditional considering it only works with 4 survivors left. But it's still amazing for comebacks when things aren't boding quite well and you've been performing off the whole match. Solid A tier. Constrain. Honestly, this perk is pretty alright. Forcing the furthest survivor from you to rotate to a different cipher does give you a pretty significant amount of extra time, especially if he rotates into another survivor. Though one downside it has is that it forces them to decode all the ciphers around the blocked one, which later can lead to a worse 3-cipher situation for you that'll be harder to control because they can save the blocked one for last, which will obviously be far away from all the others. But besides that rather iffy complaint, it's a solid perk. A tier. Confined space. All this perk really does is shut down loops, and for what it's worth, it's really good at doing just that. It stops loops like Shack Window from being basically infinites against certain hunters, like No Presence Woo, and forces the survivor to kite elsewhere. And even if it's not an infinite against a hunter, forcing a survivor to change up their route with Confined helps a lot and can sometimes catch people off guard and get you free hits. Generally just a pretty good perk to counter window looping, though not S tier due to it being rather situational. You know, survivors have to be, you know, looping windows, which is actually pretty uncommon, you know, more uncommon than you'd think. And it's also kind of map dependent, because on maps like Moonlight, you're not really going to be getting any use out of it. But overall, a really good perk. A tier. At the top of A tier, we have Desperate Fight. In duo hunters, this is godly, and even in normal matches, it's really good too. Because more often than not, when there's a stunner, you'll be stunned multiple times consecutively. And having that free 20% stun reduction for the second stun is pretty big by itself, but the fact it stacks up to 60% and only needs 4 consecutive stuns to get full use of it is really good. That may sound like a lot, but you gotta remember, survivors like Enchantress and Proc stun a lot, and this perk helps counter them really well. It's insanely good for countering stunners and making chasing them and dealing with harassment from them a lot easier. Solid A tier perk. Destructiveness. Being able to tear through pallets, especially with hunters with already fast pallet breaking speeds, is just amazing. It makes it so breaking a pallet doesn't take an actual eternity, and you lose far less distance with this perk when breaking a pallet. Just the ability to break them so much faster is just so insanely good, because breaking pallets is a vital part of chases, and doing that a lot faster obviously would help a tremendous amount. Easily S tier, no questions asked. Wanted Order. This perk is severely underrated. No matter the situation, the information provided is never useless. It can provide an insane amount of information. Like, for example, if you chair someone and get the rescuer marks, or chair someone and see where, people are healing, you mark someone who's healing. And even if it marks someone decoding, that's still valuable information for knowing drivers' locations. Because even with area select, some drivers tend to rotate in very peculiar ways, which can make it hard to predict where people are. So no matter what, it's providing good info and being extremely useful. Easily an S tier perk for me and the best information perk in the game. Detention. The perk 99% of hunters run, and it's for a good reason. Even as to worse when you're losing horribly, it at least guarantees you one kill by deterring anyone to save, with you possessing the ability to one-shot them. And the comeback potential with this perk is actually insane, and can literally make or break a match. The amount of times I've won purely because of this perk is ridiculous. Its utility in the endgame is unmatched by any other endgame perk, and it's just insanely good. Now, I know there's a lot of matches where the hunter doesn't make much use of this at the end, and in fact loses without using it at all. And that happens, but it doesn't stop this perk from being insanely good more often than not. And the comeback potential is 10 times better with more high mobility hunters like Wu or Undead. But the previously mentioned times where this perk is useless are more often than not on hunters with little to no mobility. But even then, with teleport, even the lowest mobility hunter has a great chance to make a comeback with this perk. It's honestly solid S tier. And the aesthetics are awesome. I mean, red glowing eyes genuinely look very cool. Alright, the last perk in S tier is Trump Card. Probably the best perk in the game. The ability to switch traits mid-game allows you to run Blink early game and switch to something like Teleport or Abnormal towards the end, which can change the game immensely and turn any grim situation to an actually winnable game. I cannot tell you how many matches I've lost because of a hunter switching to Abnormal and abnormally in their Cypher, forcing us to decode another one, and we just lose purely because of that. Or them switching to Teleport, like, it's easy S tier, no doubt, genuinely probably the best one in the game. It's really good. I hope whoever watched to the end enjoyed the video and can agree with at least a few of the things I said. If not, feel free to tell me about whatever you disagree with in the comments. And with that being said, see ya.